Hey gents, JCPenney is one of the oldest retailers in the world. They've been a staple at malls for over 120 years, but now they are a shell of their former selves. I want to talk about, of course, Ron Johnson today. I want to give you a little bit of context in their history because I like to track how brands progress, and then we'll talk a little bit about their future. JCPenney was founded in 1902 by James Cash Penney and William Henry McManus in Kemmerer, Wyoming. In 1909, they moved the headquarters to Salt Lake City as it was closer to railroads and banks. Then in 1914, they had more than 50 stores. They relocated the headquarters to New York City. In 1924, they had over 500 stores, and in 1928, they had more than $190 million in revenue, which in today's dollars is about $2.7 billion. They were huge for the time. Their success came when the department store model was very new, it offered a lot of value to customers, and it was highly profitable. In the 60s, they continued to grow. They entered discount merchandise, issued credit cards, catalog, restaurants, appliances, beauty salons, and auto centers. They were truly a one-stop shop. In 1971, James Cash Penney died, and at the time, they had about $30 billion in today's dollars in revenue. And then the next 2 decades would be the real growth, just after some recession issues plagued them in the mid-70s. The company started selling high fashion labels in the 80s in addition to high-end perfumes. They bought a bank and renamed it JCPenney National Bank. They launched an insurance company, started a shopping television channel. They started and then stopped selling firearms, acquired smaller department store chains to fuel their growth. And then we get to the 90s. They moved the company to Plano, Texas, which is where they're still located today. It's a huge, sprawling, beautiful campus, especially at the time. It would have been incredibly revolutionary. They have tons of parking. It's built to look like a mall, but we'll get back to the headquarters in a little bit. They were one of the largest retailers at the time. They were also the largest catalog company. They then started to acquire drug chains, including Thrifty Drug, Phase Drug, and Eckert, if you remember them. And then at this point in 1998, they launched their e-commerce site, and they had over 2,000 stores. JCPenney feels a little bit of the internet bubble pain. They sell off their insurance division and then their drugstores after 35 years in 2004 to focus on the retail business. Then they launched several brands and lines until 2007 when you start to see the problems. Keep in mind, they're a massive real estate organization too, for all of the anchor stores at malls that they have, warehouses, distribution, and outlets. Not only are they doing a ton of money in retail, they're in almost every major category outside of food and supermarket. And at this point, an entire generation of Americans have had their wardrobes, their haircuts, and their homes decorated with stuff from JCPenney. March 2007, their stock peaks at $63 per share at an all-time high, and then you start to see the slide. They launch new brands, the economy collapses, and then they start their identity crisis. At this time, my grandma continues to shop there every week as she has for nearly 25 years, and they have a major database hack in 2009, and then in 2011, they're exposed for using some black hat search engine optimization tactics, which Google really dings them for, and they never really recover. They also exit the catalog business and continue to close stores every year since that stock peak at 2007. Now we're getting to the good stuff. In June of 2011, JCPenney announces that Ron Johnson is going to become the CEO in November. And keep in mind, Ron is responsible for 2 gigantic shifts and successes in the retail industry at the time. He is one of the key figures in Target's turnaround in the 90s. It's the reason that some people call it Target. And in 2000, Ron Johnson was the head of retail at Apple when they had literally 0 stores. He closely worked with Steve Jobs to roll out the Apple stores, and this was at a time when Dell and Gateway were shutting down all their stores because retail was a huge flop for technology companies and Apple had no retail presence. It's tough to think of a time when an Apple store doesn't sound like a multi-billion-dollar idea, but at the time it was thought to be ludicrous. When he's appointed CEO, Ron is given $52 million in stock, but he also personally invests $50 million into JCPenney because this guy is all in. At the time, I was working for Apple in retail, and I remember how big of a loss that it felt as a company, but I was also so excited about Ron Johnson taking over this very historic and important retailer because I could tell he had a vision, and he talked about that when he took over, is he knew that there was importance in the brand and he wanted to really turn it around and make sure the company was around for another 100 years. Pretty immediately, he took some bold moves at JCPenney. Keep in mind, their revenues had been in decline for 20 prior quarters, store traffic was down, and to keep customers coming in, they were heavily discounted and their margins were eroding. They quickly rebranded with new logos, store layouts, and most importantly, eliminating discounts and coupons. The internet went on fire with that move. At the time, the plan was that they would lose about 15% on comps. The actual was 19%, so it's not too bad. But the narrative in the press and on Wall Street was that this is not going well. and Wall Street is not patient. What they did was move to an everyday fair price, which is how Walmart operates, and many other retailers are starting to adopt this strategy. It's a much more authentic and honest way to run a business and have that direct dialogue with customers. Today, in the area of everything being 40% off and these games with MSRPs that Marshall and TJ Maxx plays, which they've actually been sued for, it's deceptive and it's not a way to have a long-term sustainable business, and Ron knew that. He recognized that customers need to be educated, and 20% of their customers were really upset, but it was a very vocal 20%. Anecdotally, and I've heard this many times over in the comments as I talk about JCPenney, this was the first time that I walked into a JCPenney like on my own volition because I was curious about what was going on. And I bought my first like nice wool peacoat because I actually felt like I understood what was going on in the store. I didn't have to worry about coupons and discounts. I was getting a great product at the right price. But the strategy for JCPenney turned out to be about 5 to 10 years too early for them, and they were just very ahead of the market. And you can see that in the way that online brands run today. There's rarely discounts and promotions. Sometimes they'll do them around Black Friday, but there was definitely issue in how quickly he moved into this new vision. But you could argue that because the retailer is so old, it would have been fast no matter how quickly he moved. Ron Johnson left in 2013, and I worked with JCPenney several times at my old company. He left a deep, deep scar, but when you would listen to the complaints, it was a lot of people that just weren't comfortable with the change that would be necessary for a 100-year-old company to survive, and they have still never recovered. A lot of their talent has now bled out into the Dallas region and many other retailers within the industry, and so there are silver linings to this. In particular, not only are you seeing innovation in the retail space, but there is a lot of really cool stuff going on in Dallas. Today, JCPenney rarely sees much growth. Their stores are old, in need of a refresh, and in an era where every brand is trying to cut out the middleman, it's hard for them to get new fashionable brands the way that they used to. JCPenney is not only a victim of the shift to internet commerce, but it's also of its unwillingness to change. Retail companies today operate with a fraction of the headcount JCPenney had in the 2000s, and there's a lot of pains with moving to that more lean model. It's the same thing as plaguing J.Crew right now and all the retail brands that were going bankrupt in 2016. Today, that big, beautiful canvas in Plano has been sold off, and they're leasing it out to many other companies within there, and it's really sad. I went to a local JCPenney store last year, and the place was poorly lit, it was dirty, and it just felt like the set from a Walking Dead. It's a shame because JCPenney used to employ thousands and thousands of people, including my best friend's mother, so I definitely know the shift there. But if you don't adapt, you die. And JCPenney's board did not have the cojones to really stand up to Wall Street and go along with this new vision, which I think was the correct one. And now they're following the same slow path that Sears is following into obscurity and being an anecdote in somebody else's YouTube video in the future. Maybe they'll pull off one more miraculous change. I think it'll be pretty tough, but I'd love to hear what you guys think down below in the comments, and I will see you guys down there. Until next time, gents, this is The Cavalier. To be, it's okay, no one's around. I'm off season, vacation time.